The analogy Mr Forsyth gave summed up how the EU funds the UK after he forked out his cash on TV.Baron Forsyth of Drumlean said, £350 million a week is our gross contribution to the EU. Turning to David Dimbleby, he said, if I give you £10, to which the BBC Question Time presenter jokingly said, thank you, and took the cash. BBCThe analogy brilliantly sums up the UK's relationship with the EU to the audience. Laughed, and Mr Forsyth added, now you give me £20. Mr Dimbleby quipped, certainly not, but the Conservative politician continued with his analogy, and by the way, I'm going to tell you how to spend that £10. That is the deal we have with the European Union. Mr Dimbleby joked, we'll keep that. Friday, January 20th. 2017. Nick Griffin attacks Jack Straw's father. My father was in the RAF during the Second World War, while Mr Straw's father was in prison for refusing to fight Adolf Hitler. The SNP Cabinet Secretary for Culture, Tourism and External Affairs Fiona Hislop claimed the Governor of the Bank of England said the current 0.9% GDP depression the UK is seeing right now is worth £350 million a week. Now, Mr Forsyth, who served in John Major's cabinet, pressed Ms Hislop over the SNP's record of spending on the NHS. He said, just on that point on the health service, you might just want to explain why, if we take from 2012 to 2016, expenditure on the NHS in England went up by 10%, but in Scotland, it only went up by 5%. Why is that? Ms Hislop replied, because we have regularly increased investment in the health service. Since the Scottish Government came to power, investment in the health service has gone up £4 billion to £13 billion, and just in this time alone in Dumfries, there has been a brand new hospital. Thursday, December 14, 2017. Theresa May's Tory Brexit rebels, and the health service in Scotland by any regard is far more resilient and it not going the privatisation route we are seeing in the rest of the UK. The audience applauded the AMSP for Lynn Lithgow, but the former Secretary of State for Scotland still pressed. He said, you've got 20% more per head because of the money that comes from England under the Barnett formula. The Scottish audience erupted into boos, but the Conservative Lord continued, and you have spent that money which came from the increase in expenditure on the health service on other things. BBC David Dimbleby took the £10 and kept tight. It comes as the audience asked the panel whether Theresa May was correct to slap down Boris Johnson for wanting more money for the NHS. On Tuesday, the Foreign Secretary was rebuked by the Prime Minister for making it known before a cabinet meeting about health that he would demand an extra £100 million a week for the NHS. At the ministers' meeting, Mrs May then preempted the Foreign Secretary by making clear that any money saved by Brexit would go to the government's priorities, including schools and housing as well as health. BBCThe Tory Lord pressed Ms Hislop on NHS spending. There was frustration among some of Mr Johnson's ministerial and Tory colleagues, and even calls for him to be sacked over his team's ill-disciplined pre-briefing about a behind-closed-doors meeting. Liam Fox, who like Mr Johnson campaigned for Brexit in the 2016 referendum, said, I think there is a case to spend more money on healthcare, and we are spending more money on healthcare. I think it's very useful to remind people that we're getting a dividend from leaving the EU.